As he hopped in.
Mm-hmm.
Hey guys. Can
Hey,
you hear
how
me?
are you? We meet at
Good,
last.
good. Yes. It's been a long
How are you
Hi,
time.
today, my
Brian.
friend? Huh?
All good, all good. It's
All
Sunday,
right.
so just chilling.
What time is it over there in Europe?
It's five in the afternoon.
Ah, you must have had a fun day off.
Oh yeah, definitely. It's the weekend. I try to keep my Sundays off, but it normally ends up being half of the day work and half of the day,
Well, yeah,
because
because you're a
there's no,
business executive.
yeah, exactly. So
All right.
yeah.
So now that the recording is going, let's get started. All right, guys. Welcome back to Pick Your Brains podcast today. Today, I have the honor of bringing on my second business executive to the show today, so he can share some of his life story and also, how he got to where he did. Today, I have CoPublica's Brian Bapista, who's also a serial entrepreneur. So, since this is not a formal business interview, like you're interviewing for a job, let's have a little bit of light fun. Why don't you tell us where you're originally from? Because I know some people, when they immigrate, go to different places.
Sure, of course. So the story goes back like generations. So like 3 generations ago, my great grandparents they immigrated from India to Kenya in Africa, and my parents and different ways they met each other in Kenya. I was born in Kenya, and then we came to Denmark in was it 73? So that's the story. And the reason why my surname is Baptista is that the colony that we originally from in India is Goa, and Goa is a former Portuguese colony, and that explains why my surname is Baptista.
I was about
So that's
to
a long
ask,
story.
and I was about to ask a very oddly interesting question. So Goa was originally colonized by Portugal, correct? Is
Correct,
Goa its
exactly.
own country, or is Goa just like a province of India?
It's just a state in India.
So
Well,
it's a
just a
state
state. It's
within
one of the, I think
India.
actually, yeah, it's the smallest state, I think. There are about 2.5 million people in Goa.
Was there a port city? Is that considered a port city? Like right
Yeah,
on the body? Ah, okay. So that's where all the goods and that's where all the market goods would basically enter into the country of India, right?
yeah. Well, one of them, India is big, so, but I don't have that many relations to India anymore. I mean, since it's been generations ago since we left, I think I would, if people ask me, I normally say I'm from Denmark because that's probably the most accurate answer. But yeah, and I'm a Danish citizen, so yeah, I am Danish.
Ah, okay. And it's funny because especially in this country, Denmark and that region of Europe are always looked at and cited most notably by the United States government as what I consider a good example of capitalism mixed with socialist policies, or that's what they call it over here. But what I would call what your country is a good, decent mix of is doing what's right for business and doing what's right for regular people in a compromise. Would you say that's
Yeah, I would
fair?
say I would. Yeah, I think that's fair. So we have some of the highest taxes in the world in Denmark and in Scandinavia, some of the highest corporate tax, but for good reasons. So we have free healthcare, we have free schooling. We get a lot of stuff paid for by the government, which is why the setup is. You can say as an entrepreneur, sometimes I would like to have better. A lot of entrepreneurs they go outside of Denmark to start up their companies, like company owners. They go to Switzerland and other places, which I think is a bit of a shame because we probably have one of the best societies in the world to be at as a person. But I would like them to tweak it a little bit in terms of in favor of entrepreneurs. But in general, yeah, I do agree with you.
That's the thing with most entrepreneurs. That's actually the most cited argument over here in this country, which is why, for example, two large states in this area, New York and California versus Texas and Florida. Where do more entrepreneurs want to go in the United States of America? Unfortunately, it's Texas and Florida because public policy is more geared to somebody like yourself who's an
Yeah.
entrepreneur, but the people you see going to these parts are like the Elon Musks of the world, because, you know, he doesn't like, he wants to keep more of his money, or he wants the government to do more things that are in his favor as a C corporation. Let's just say
Yeah.
in one of my previous positions when I worked in the nonprofit sector at Goodwill, I gained a much better understanding and education on how the United States tax code works. Now, which actually brings me to my next thing, since you mentioned Kenya is your homeland. I noticed on your LinkedIn that as an executive, one of the good things for you is you get to chair different organizations, you know, from like a philanthropy perspective. Do you want to tell us how you first achieved
Yeah.
your CEO and chairman's title, and then how you ventured off into other, you know, aspects of your life?
Sure. I'm like, when I finalized my master's, I always thought that I was going to be Mr. Corporate, like going into a corporate job and staying in the corporate world. When I say corporate, I mean, you know, plus 1,000 employees, this kind of, you know, this kind of engines of companies. So when I originally ended, so one of my first jobs was actually with a startup, and I really loved it. It was really great, but I could also feel that I needed a bit of the discipline and the process optimization in my head in terms of going into the corporate world. So I joined a medical company in the Danaher Group, which is a very large group owning a lot of medical companies. And I was there for almost 9 years actually. You know, doing the whole corporate thing, which I actually loved it. It was great. It was really good. I used to work a lot with Africa because of my background. And I used to work with a lot of organizations like ministries and organizations going into Africa, large, charity organizations and so on. So I had a good feel of it. Then what happened is that I joined Lego. I think for most people in the world, if Lego comes knocking, you wanna see what they want. And I joined Lego.
One of the most iconic toy makers, since you just
Exactly.
mentioned that, and I actually
Exactly.
remember this. That was one of my favorite things to do when I was a little kid. I'm not going to
Yeah.
lie, because every kid loves Legos. It's the fact that you
Of
get
course.
to build and engineer something, and it gives you an idea of, you know, even building a you're basically learning how to build a structure from a very young age.
Totally. And I loved it. It was great. It was great fun. So what I did was that I worked with a lot of ministries around the world in the education space. I loved it. It was fantastic. And then back in 2016, I decided to start up my own company. I was lucky enough to be able to utilize some of the contacts I had from my previous history. And I onboarded a bunch of companies, loved to do that as well. And then in 19, I got an offer to buy out my company, my consultancy company, which I said yes to. And
Was that the
then,
company that you were still running when I started engaging with you in 2020?
yes, so actually it was still CoPublica, but what the company did is that it bought out the complete client base. So I didn't have a client base, but I was allowed to keep my brand. So I kept my brand, but I didn't have any clients. So I had to start all over again in 19, but not in the same field. But one of the things that I started to do just before COVID hit is that I started to look at could I automate a lot of the processes I had done in my consultancy company and move my company from a consultancy company to a tech company. But that suddenly opened up to your question about how did I end up in all of these organizations. I'm the chairman of different organizations and also on the board of different organizations that has something to do with Africa, is actually because I suddenly entered the tech world and suddenly I got a lot of different new contacts. I'm a networker of persons, so I suddenly started networking in the tech world, and then I got offered different positions to help these organizations about bridging the gap between cultural and business-wise between Scandinavia and Africa, which I've been doing all my career. So it was quite an easy fit. And then also had a bunch of projects that did exactly the same thing in the digital space. So that's what I do. So in the meantime, what has happened is that I now have taken my company from. So what we do now is we build our tech in our company, and then we find founders that want to start up their own company. We offer them our tech for a percentage of the company, and then we bridge that. Many founders have great ideas, but getting started with them can be a big problem. Just knowing how to use the tech, how do you get started with taking this idea to the market and stuff like that. And that's expertise we've brought since I started my career. So that's so my career has changed a lot in the last 20 years.
That's interesting because as you've seen also, and I would like to know what you think. I gained 36 subscribers this year alone on my YouTube channel. My LinkedIn following grew to about 6,000. And this is one of my two different formats of the podcast. Pick Your Brains is how I get to learn about, the individual and, bring in some stuff about my own brand, which is going to be eventual personal consultancy for organizations on how to better acclimate adults on the spectrum. And now I would like to ask you an interesting question in your working experience. Especially Denmark and the Scandinavian region are also looked at well for another reason, aside from the free healthcare. How do organizations work with adults on the spectrum in that region of Europe? And have you worked with people on the spectrum as well?
Yeah. So the interesting part of all of this is that I think there is a big openness to capabilities in Denmark, more than there is a bias towards certain groups of people. These could be any group of people, even people on the spectrum, or could it be any kind of people. I think that now we're seeing, and even more now than ever, because what's happening right now in most of Europe is that there's a lack of capabilities and skills, which means that you have to be much broader when you're looking for skill sets. You have to be much more open to different levels as long as your skill set requirements are needed. But even before this happened, because it's very much in the time right now. But the fact is that now that you look at employees in terms of can they do the job or can they do the job, and most of the times it's they cannot do the job right now, but how fast can they get up and running in terms of the job? So that's the first thing. The second thing I would say is that we help some company. I've been very active on LinkedIn.
Yes.
I love
I've seen your live streams before, and quite frankly, I've always been impressed with you because you've seen throughout the last 2 years, my mind is more geared toward other things, and you've even said publicly to me in comments that you've witnessed some of my own personal growth with not just the platform, but even right now when you're coming on this show. This has been a lot of work for me to, be doing in my spare time, but it allows me a platform to meet with people like yourself who, I can see we have similar mindsets. And I've noticed that was one thing you always applauded me on your own posts as the author, is that I do have a different mindset. My mindset is no longer just geared to working for somebody. My mindset is geared toward, I want to get away from that. And this is the first step.
Yeah. Sorry.
And this is the first step. So now your turn.
Yeah. No, I agree. I agree with you. I mean, when you asked me the question about have I ever worked with people on the spectrum? Yes, definitely I have. So I used to help this one company recruit IT specialists, and not to say that people in spectrum can only do IT, but I have experienced myself that within IT there is a certain skill set and a certain level that you can get to with some people on the spectrum. And this is back to capabilities again. Yeah. So and this is not me being black and white about it. There's lots of other things that they can do, but the fact is that I've seen that it actually means it's actually a competitive edge sometimes to be able to think differently, like you, Benjamin. You think differently. But another thing is that it's also a matter of can you work hard or can't you work hard? Yeah. Can you focus? Can you focus? These are other things that are not bound to you being on the spectrum or you having some other element.
No, it's me being human.
Person. Yeah, exactly. Totally. So the fact is that people in Scandinavia see through that. Would I say that everything is perfect here? I would definitely say not. It's not perfect. It's not, but it's getting there. It's getting better and better and better. And
it's better than over. It's better than over here in the United States of America, because unfortunately, when you look I think the difference between where you live and where we live, me and Justin, is over here in the United States, we're still stuck in the 20th century at the top, of our government. If you look at
Okay.
the fact that Joe Biden isn't necessarily a bad leader, but this particular age group, is still looking at 20th century ideas, not 21st century ideas. And we need 21st century ideas now going forward because, even Europe, there's a youth movement. A lot of elected leaders on your continent are now your age. That's where the United States needs to start shifting. We need to start looking at, and I've had people on LinkedIn say to me before, we respect the older generations, but it's really your kids' future. So that means Gen X, that means millennials, that means Gen Z. These should be the people making, the decisions, not the older generations.
Yeah, I think that's totally right and totally spot on. I mean, there is that issue. I mean, we're talking about, I live in one of the most liberal countries in the world. So I have this discussion very often.
Business liberal or social liberal?
Both. Very, very liberal on both sides. Maybe not so much when it comes to tax again, but basically on everything else, we're very liberal.
Your conservatives would be more socially liberal mixed with business liberal, whereas over here conservatism means something completely different.
Yeah, I can give you an example. Right now, there is a current sitting government right now, but they're negotiating because of the current elections. And right now, the Social Party and the Conservatives are going to be go into government together for the first time ever in Denmark. So it just shows how much the parties are moving towards the middle and how little they will sway to each side. And that ultimately means that they're not, but I would say they're not getting more conservative. They're getting more social democratic. There's no doubt about that. And since this, but this moment, sometimes I get a little bit. It's very difficult for me to discuss things like equal pay for women and all these kind of elements because I'm from a country where that is just a given. That is just normal.
But if you tried to discuss that over here, you would literally get shut down every single time because unfortunately there are still things over here in the United States, not specific to regions, which are still completely backwards.
Yeah.
One of those would be the treatment and acceptance of people on the spectrum.
Yeah.
That's one.
But also you have to remember, we're such a small country, yeah? We have 5.5 million people. It takes 4.5 hours to drive from one place to another, yeah? It's a country that is kind of manageable when it comes to politics. So Denmark is not, they don't enforce rules, but they're very strict on rules, and they have set rules for a long time, and they have a good discipline in the country. Where in the US, what happens is that you're so diverse in terms of your country. It's such a huge country, such a huge population with so many different policies and changes and history. Where in Denmark, it's been, I wouldn't say easier, but it's still more manageable when it comes to politics. And as I said again, I mean, our parties are, if you look at what the parties, their opinions, you have a lot more differences and variances in the core elements of the opinions in the US than we have in Denmark. Most people, you can't get into parliament and say women don't have the same rights, or you don't fight for gay rights, or you can't even go into parliament like that. Where in other countries, I know that would actually be a key selling point. But that won't work in Denmark or in the rest of Scandinavia anyway.
I'm sure there are regions of the African continent and countries within the African continent that are still particularly backwards. And by backwards, we mean still stuck in the freedom fighter generation, where they were separating from the colonizer.
Oh yes, I mean for sure. I mean it's all about education. Luckily, I still work in the education space, and I know what happens with a population when you focus on education. If you take the government in Rwanda, for example, it's a good example of them changing from going from the genocide to having one of the most educated populations in Africa, having a country that is just miles in front of every other African country when it comes to social equality,
Kenya is even
financial status, and
interesting within itself
yeah,
because Kenya just had a large election, and this new president wasn't exactly liked in the first place because, you know, he's also seen as a human rights violator within his own
yeah,
country.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
he's
yeah, yeah,
worse.
exactly,
He was
exactly.
worse than his predecessor, who the predecessor had his, the predecessor, let me be honest, not Ruto, but Ruto's predecessor. I didn't necessarily like the guy, but the guy was entitled to his opinion on things, but he seemed to be a better leader.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's so complex. These
African
days
politics is very complex, which is
is
understandable, which is
yeah,
why most of them just immigrate wherever they can.
yeah, yeah, and then also you can have the whole discussion about you know dictatorships. Is that a good or bad thing? When I say dictatorships, they call it, you know, democracy, but in some of these African countries, they've had a sitting president for many years, but still been able to run the country very efficiently. So it's a different discussion, but also it's a different history. And I
Well,
don't
their way
think
of
it's
doing
fair to
business
compare
is
any of the
still very
countries.
reliant on petroleum exploitation, just as an example. Like if you look at Nigeria, they're never going to change to like to how leadership in Ghana would look like, for example, because of the fact that most of OPEC, if I remember correctly, were literally Muslim, you know, region petroleum exporting countries with Muslim leadership or different
Yeah,
different view of oil and gas.
for sure, for sure.
Different
But
view of oil
back,
and gas,
yeah,
but that's a discussion
yeah.
for opinionated collective podcast panel discussions that, you know, I would definitely like to bring you for different business topics. So
Sure.
I wanted to get your interesting take on what's your view of the tech layoffs going right now in the States? Do you think that it was because of the overhiring done at the start of COVID, or just the fact that they overspent in too many categories? Because you're seeing top companies like Tesla lay off a large amount, Twitter this month, Carvana. How do you feel
I
as an
think
executive?
so as an executive, what I care about as an executive is that the company is profitable, and it's profitable over time, which means that it's not a short-term element. And the reason why I'm saying that is that in terms of our employees and our stakeholders, we have to make sure that the company is sustainable over time as well. So I think that the time is coming to an end where investors push in money to companies that are less profitable or not profitable, where you can see many of these companies, when you look into their finances, you can see that they are not profitable, and they probably never have been profitable, because they're looking at future valuations instead of profitability. And what happens
So
then is that
you are alluding to the fact that you believe eventually we're not going to have what we call in the States the activist hedge fund investor who's buying up shares in public companies the way Warren Buffett did that, or
I think we are.
Carl
I think we
Icahn,
are.
the
I think
corporate
we
raider.
definitely
That's
are.
what that
Yeah,
was called.
we are going to have it, but it's just going to be less. It's going to be less. I mean, in terms of the investment environment in Europe compared to the US is completely different, because the way that investors look at one of the first things an investor would tell you in Europe is that, hey, now we need to see you get it profitable. We need you to see you make money. Yeah. Where in the US, what investors have told us, for example, is that we don't care if you're profitable or not. Just go and get a user base, build a user base, build a user base. If you're not profitable for the next 5 years, don't worry about it, because we'll keep on supporting you. So it's just two different ways of looking at of running a company. And back to the layoffs, I think I'm not a fan of layoffs. Obviously not. I don't
No
think
one is.
any
And I think
executive is a
most
fan
of
of
that, if
layoffs.
I'm
Yeah.
correct from your level of the company, is that really the CEO, or is that the CFO who's looking to cut costs when they've overspent? Because I always had a feeling that was more directed from the finance department saying
Well,
we have to, we spend too much in this area, so we kind of got to axe this area.
At the end of the day, the CEO is responsible. So basically, the CEO would be responsible for taking that decision together with the board. Yeah, probably often the board, and on basis of the CFO giving the CEO the advice, but the CEO eventually giving the layout to the board, and then they would have to take a decision. The fact is that I don't think any CEO likes to cut employees, because that's not why you become the CEO. You can become the CEO to become a profitable, grow your company in any sense. And cutoffs is a way to show that you are not running the company in the right way. Now, I don't have all the details for all the companies, and their setups are different, I know, but the fact is that if you look at the top 10 most unprofitable companies, some of the companies you just mentioned are on that list. Yeah. So that's why that things have to change. And also because although they're doing large cutoffs of the workforce, there's still a lot of people that are staying in those companies. So in terms of retaining their jobs, you have to do something as a CEO. And also, what will happen is that your investors will lose patience with you if you keep on being unprofitable, and then you will have a harder time, and then you have to do cutoffs again. Or layoffs again, which is a massive problem. So my take is that if it's needed, then do it. If not,
the issue over
not.
here is, unfortunately, American businesses have always run quarter to quarter. But when you look at a country like Japan, Japan does what, and I'm sure Europe is going this direction like Japan on how to build a business, is like a 5 to 10 year plan. And that's what Japan was always known for with their private businesses, was they stuck to a 5 to 10 year plan. They didn't go quarter to quarter. So is that the direction that Europe is going?
No, it's not actually. Not that the way that I see it. You would still give companies a 3 to 5 year plan to show that they can become profitable. They have a viable business, a sustainable business. You probably wouldn't give them 10 years. Now, as I mentioned again, I invest in companies as well, and I think that the first 2 to 3 years are absolutely critical. Do I have the patience to wait for more than that? The answer is definitely no. I would know in the first 2 to 3 years if this company is going somewhere, and I'm willing to pay money into it. Now, again, your setup in the US is a lot different. Your market outlooks are much different, and also the level of money you have is completely different to what investors are putting into companies in Denmark. But still, I would go back to say, no CEO is going to make that decision unless it's absolutely necessary, because it's also a slap in the face for themselves, and it's not something that you would want to do unless you are really forced to do it. And also, you have to remember another thing is that none of them have, although CEOs have a lot of experience and stuff like that, no one has, no one can see into the future. So they're doing their best to try and steer the company back on track. And they're doing their best they can. Now, you can always discuss about the details of what they're doing, because what's happening in many of these companies is that you suddenly see that they're letting off customer-facing people and getting more internal stuff, like finance executives. They are ramping up on lawyers and stuff like that are not customer-facing. I've seen that in multiple of the companies also in the US, that suddenly they are ramping up on parts of their company that are not beneficial for their market status, which is the wrong way of doing downsizing. But in general, I support any CEO that's doing downsizing because it's a necessity, definitely.
Well, because everything is changing with how Amazon basically kind of showed you could grow something online. I give Amazon credit for that, but at the same time, I'm also critical with how, Amazon is also doing the exact same thing everybody else is doing. Do I agree with it? No. But do I see a reason behind it? Yes. Because, I understand they have to reduce headcounts, but at the same time, it's not fun. And, as you can see with LinkedIn, sometimes it's always funny that when the biggest brand names to me do the layoffs, everyone rushes to help those people on LinkedIn who are doing public posts. But there's so many people, and even myself, who didn't work at a big brand name company, where you see different people like career coaches and consultants and strategists who gear their services, but they don't think about people like me, in a lower tier. They're only looking at big brand name companies, which, let's be honest, I don't know if that's the world's best strategy, but I'm not a coach. I'm running a podcast, and, I'm going to share something with you about what I eventually want to be able to do. And that's, I want this to become a full services media company that creates, content and classes in the ed tech realm and also the fintech realm.
Mm-hmm.
So there will be a huge use for, people like myself on the spectrum as well, because not only is it technology, but it's a good use of creativity. And this, as an example, the podcast, I believe, best showcases my creativity because I am a writer. I came from a family of writers.
Sure. Yeah, it sounds
and it's
right.
something that I've really worked hard at this year, along with, the modern grammar tools that have gotten better. So another great question I have for you is, from the executive's perspective, what kind of environment do you believe your workers thrive in? And this goes to management. Do you believe a thought leader can also become a good people manager, to a sense, who can be respected by the work?
Yeah, of course, definitely it can be. I'm actually in right now in the situation where we have a lot of people working from us in India, for example, and we've hired them because we had difficulties finding IT specialists in Scandinavia. They're very difficult to find because there's hardly any of them available, and even if they are available, it's difficult for us to get them because they would rather go into the big consultancy companies, IT consultancy, or the big healthcare companies there in Denmark. So in a management situation, I'm managing people that are used to be managed differently. Yeah. So I experience this on a daily basis, how in my way of doing management, we have absolutely no hierarchies. My title doesn't really matter. We listen to the people.
No, of course your title doesn't matter, because I'll give you a great example for this. Since I was considered the guy that started this, I'm on a founder level like yourself. So I'm sure there would be some level of programs that you have within your own company that would be geared towards someone like me, because I am on a founder's level. So I also do hold the president title. And, eventually, if I ever incorporated, then I would have a need, but, for other executives. But what I really am with this is really a project manager. If you really look at, what I've done from let's say June last year to June this year, this has been literally a large scale project that I've been able to grow. And like you, I don't look at my titles. I look at, the fact that I've effectively been able to manage something of this capacity to sitting down with you today. That's, growth right there.
Sure. No, so one of the things that I realized is that this thing about not having a title, not having any hierarchies, listening to the person that has something to say instead of listening to the person that has the greatest title. All these kind of things come very natural to me, because this is how I've been led even when I'm in the corporate space, freedom to do whatever you want and all of that. No one tells you what to do. You figure it out, and you have some goals you have to reach, but how you get there is your own. You have to figure out yourself. But the problem is when you then have people that are not being led in that way, things are just at a standstill. So you need to adapt, basically. So to a question about, can a thought leader become a good people manager? I think so, for sure. But you cannot just take a book and start reading about it, because you have to adapt to a certain situation that you are in, because employees have a different history, and you can't just cut all of them and say this group of employees, you need to do this, and this group you need to do that. So basically, I think the adaptability of the leadership style to the situation, and also being able to move them towards your way of leadership, getting them to understand that, for example, I'm not going to tell them every morning that they have to run this way, and they have to do 50 push-ups every morning and all that. I'm not going to go into details of anything. What I would require for them to
because
do
that's
is that,
authoritarian right there. That's
yeah, yeah,
that's the 20th century way of running an organization, and now we're in the 21st century where
exactly.
if you're running Royal Dutch Shell, for example, then yeah, it's going to unfortunately be about the hierarchy because that's oil, that's petroleum, that's oil and gas. So that would be understandable that you need that level of a hierarchy. If you're running a hotel, then obviously it's about the hierarchy, but the best ideas don't always come from executives. They come from the people at the bottom who are experiencing working with the customer.
Which is exactly why the leadership style of getting people to figure out how to get to the end goal is definitely better than people that are actually doing it, instead of people that are in a leadership position that just knows where we have to go. Yeah. We don't know every detail, and we shouldn't know every detail, but people that know the details often have a really good way of figuring out which way that we should get to the goal. But my point was more before to say that when you are in situational management, you need to figure out that you need to align with your employees from the beginning, get them to understand, and not everything to begin with, but get them to understand which way we are going. So I've had people I've worked with now for 3 years, and where we started and where we are now is two completely different ways of leadership, because I realized from the beginning is that I needed to be more directive in the beginning, but then tell them that this is not how I'm going to keep on being a leader. I'm going to slowly start letting go, because if I don't let go, you don't get smarter and smarter and smarter as an employee. You get dumber and dumber and dumber. If you don't think for yourself and utilize yourself and your capacity in your job, what happens is that it reverses your growth. Yeah, and it just means that you either stuck or you go downwards in terms of your growth.
And that's why I also believe when you look at the United States right now and how millennials think business should be run, this is why you're seeing what I guess they call as perceived job hopping, but it's not job hopping. It's companies are still being run with outdated methods and processes. I agree with you on that, because if a good example of a leader, you remind me of someone over here that I follow frequently, Gary Vaynerchuk. Look at that. Yeah. When most people go to work for Gary V, he has his own podcast. He has a different way of looking at how he ran media and how he talks about branding, even though it's kind of the same stick. There's so much respect that anyone who works for him sees. They don't see somebody with a title. They see somebody who goes out and does motivational speeches. He's always talking about the best social media platforms to use, what you can do to organically grow. Now, he is repetitive, but that's who you sort of remind me of in a way, because him and this part of Gen X is thinking more along the lines of millennials age 30 and younger. Millennials in their 30s, we were always thinking about this stuff. But when you look at the millennials, grouping under 30 to now the new generation, they're kind of more vocal than we were, because we understood, like myself, you kind of got to play by the rules to a certain way.
Yeah. And also one of the things it just made me think about is that, as a CEO, I'm the kind of CEO that cares about how well my company goes. Yeah. And if you take that as the end goal, as the company going really well, and then you calculate backwards, what does that require for my company to go really well? One, it requires happy customers. Yeah. It also requires, to get happy customers, I need happy employees. Yeah.
That's just like Richard Branson, by the way. That's Richard. You're like you're a new generation Richard Branson, because this is stuff Richard Branson was talking about. But you know what I mean. Richard Branson was talking about this stuff back in the early 2000s. I remember my mom even pointed that out to me. And I'm like, he's ahead of his time. But then again, now that I'm an adult, I'm like, no, he's just talking about things that were talked about in previous generations. That made sense. You need to worry about the employees first before you worry about the customers. Because if the customers are having a bad experience, it starts with the employees, not firing the employees, but reinforcing, how the employee can feel better. And it comes down to pay sometimes. Other people, it comes down to, I want a level of respect in being able to do my job. Trust me to do the job.
It's bad for business if employees are not happy. If you want to talk to a CFO language, it's simply a bad for business. So this is one of the things that, there's lots of bad managers out there, or bad managers that haven't had any further education. I saw a stat the other day saying that over 85% of managers in the US have never had any further education as being a manager, which means that they go into management and then they're just, they might get a course 1 or 2 times, during their career, but then it's just learning by doing. That's basically how they learn to do management. And since they've never learned anything additional in terms of just ways of doing management, and they just look at what their managers have done, and then they just try to replicate that, that means that the growth rates just in terms of management is just on a standstill. So there's no global stats on this, but if you look it up on Google, you will see that there's loads of stats in the US, and they're shocking when it comes to management. So I think that that's one of the ways where, if you talk about middle management, me as a CEO, I have middle managers in my organization. But if I do not train my middle managers and get a pipeline of managers coming out with the same mindset,
that comes to personal development.
Yeah,
that comes to personal and professional
yeah.
development, because that's, if it's good to have internal courses to be taken to try to help personally develop them, but you have to encourage them to also do it on the outside as well, and not just, whether that's reskilling, whether that's taking, different types of development courses that are people centric. That's definitely the right way to go, because this whole podcast for me has been, for the last year and a half, as well as writing for Medium, has been a whole exercise in personal and professional development. That's put me in a much happier place in my life to be able to, I get frustrated at times like anyone else, because, my position right now, I work at Optum. I like what I do. But when I go home on the weekend and I do something like this recharges me for the week.
Yeah, sure. I definitely see. There's also another element of what you just mentioned about the difference between some of the countries when it comes to management thinking, is that, for example, I would rate myself being right probably less than 50% of the time. Yeah. I mean, I know it may sound weird, but when I'm discussing something with my employees, I know I'm probably not right. I'm not right 100% of the times. I'm not even right 80% of the times. I think more or less, maybe 50% of the time would probably be about accurate. Yeah. But I know that 50% of the times I can be wrong in the discussion. Yeah. And just accepting that and being open to their perspective just means that I'm a lot more efficient than I would be if I was a traditional manager that would drive my ideas through. Yeah. Because that's also another management style that it seems to be very effective, even if you look at stats, especially in the short term. That if you micromanagement is very efficient in the short term. It's being directive is very effective in the short term. Being not open to other ideas and just driving your ideas is also very effective in the short term. And some managers, they mix that up in terms of that being efficient. And some boards mix that up in terms of being efficient. Yeah. So I think especially when you look at the last quarter of a company, that is where managers typically wind up and become very micromanagement in terms of their styles. They become very directive because they want to close the year very well, or up to every quarter. And sometimes that's seen as good management styles. Yeah. And I think that what I've seen in Europe, at least, or Scandinavia at least, that is softening up a lot. So now it's the responsibilities, obviously, with the CEO and their managers that are in the company. But ultimately, I see a bigger feeling of responsibilities from people that are not managers, that have specific targets to set. And one of the things is this education about pushing the responsibilities to the people that are actually doing it, that are actually working with it every day, and learning about, if you move things from A to B, or you are a welder, or you're an IT person doing something every single day, the ideas should come from there, because they become much stronger. And the feeling of being responsible for meeting your targets is much bigger. So I see a quite big shift in the way of doing management in Scandinavia, which I really like because it fits really well with my mindset. But in our new company, I didn't tell you, I've invested into a company called A2 Nitro. What it does is that it automates the process
So
of finding
A2
a local
Nitro
partner.
is your current business, correct?
Well, I own CoPublica, but then CoPublica invests in different companies, and one of the companies
So
is A2 Nitro.
CoPublica and A2 Nitro, I'm sure myself and the audience would appreciate knowing. Do you hire locally within where you are, or do you hire all over the place, different continents? And are the positions remote, even though I think you said a majority of your workforce is in India?
So CoPublica, my company in Denmark, we hire people all over the world, and they're typically remote. So we have different people in different plants. We have some in Africa, we have some in India, we have some in the Philippines. We have a guy in the US actually. So we have different people working with us, and they're all remote because after COVID, we're not a believer of having an actually office. So we had a big office before COVID. During COVID, no employees were allowed to go to the office. So we decided to quit our lease, and everyone is working from home, which is working really well for us now. Would I have said that before COVID? No.
If you kept an office, the one thing that I would say is it would be harder to get somebody to move to Europe just because of visa requirements. Like if, for example, I wanted to take a job with you in one of your companies, am I really going to want to move to Europe? It's going to be a much longer process. Hence, this is why I believe I think the workforce of the future is going to be remote, for some regions.
Totally. Yeah, I totally.
And I think it's a much better way to run a company. If someone like me, for example, depending on what you hire for, I could work from, where I am in New York, and, so long as I have a computer and Zoom, it's almost the same as going to the office.
Yeah, and I think this is one of the things we learned because of COVID is that, people are not scared of working this way as they were before, and this has just become the new normal, which is great. I really appreciate it. I do like meeting people in person, especially new people in person. But people I've worked with before, it's not a problem for me. Yeah, but it works.
This is fine for me also to meet people this way. I'm open to both. It's just at a certain point, I think the biggest lesson I learned from COVID, depending on friendships, even in my own life, is I will invest in friendships that I believe are meaningful from, going way back versus, at this point, forget about value. It's, do I see a reason to keep a person around? If that's the case, then I'd rather just hop on a Zoom call and meet somebody like this if they're in a different, state or another part of the globe. This is just as much fun for me as going to an in-person event. I prefer in-person events, but at a certain point now, especially journeying from employee to founder, to running a business the way you have, I'm open to all types of, types of anyone, be it in person or Zoom.
Yeah, what I like about these kind of meetings is that I'm fully concentrated on you and what you're saying. And the same thing goes in the other way, which means that we can cover a lot more than we would have done in a physical meeting because we're fully concentrated. Right now, I'm looking at you, I'm hearing what you're saying, but I zone out like everyone else because I'm human. I zone out a little bit when it comes to physical meetings, especially if we have like a 2 or 3 hour meeting. I zone out a bit and I'm not fully concentrated. I think this is actually really efficient, especially for remote work. So to answer your question, so we have CoPublica. CoPublica is our investment company. So we invest in different companies. We have a small base of employees there to help the companies grow in terms of marketing and tech and all these kind of elements that we do. And then we have our operational companies where A2 Nitro is one of them. We right now have an office in Dubai and we have an office in Copenhagen. And then we're going to have an office in Bangkok very soon. Now in Bangkok, that office will be a physical office where people actually go to the office because that's very much in line with what they're used to. And most of the people are going to be from Bangkok, which means that it would be normal for them to go to the office there. So that's going to be our first physical office, but that's because the requirements of doing business in Bangkok requires that. because we're going to have customers flying in from different places in Asia, and that ultimately means that's needed. But other than that, we don't actually have an office, and we only look for people remotely. In some of our other companies, it's the same thing. Everyone's working from remote, and also because we have clients all over the world, and because of time differences, it can be difficult to structure it in a way where you go to the office and then you have to go home and you still have to have meetings. So I don't know. I just love this way of working. It just fits my
You've
style.
embraced it, and that's a good thing. So I want to end with one last question, and then
Sure.
couple things I'm just going to say before we finish the recording. My last question would be: do you anticipate bringing one of your brands to the United States of America? And if you do, which state would you want to come? Would you come to? Would it be New York, possibly?
It could definitely be New York. Actually, right now we are looking at California for our brand because of the number of healthcare startups there are in California. But there's also a number of them in New York. So we've actually looked at both coasts and said that, California, New York would be great places to DC. These those kind of places would be great places for us to start off with. And actually, we're starting our automation on LinkedIn very soon when it comes to attracting more companies in the medtech space to A2 Nitro. So yeah, it could definitely be something we can definitely talk about.
Yeah, I would love if you came here to New York. It would be great if you brought one of your brands here to New York, because not only could we meet, I'm sure we would. There'll be more collaborations through my podcast, but it would be amazing to have someone like you as a mentor in my life, because from just this 1 hour conversation, I've enjoyed getting to know you. The audience will enjoy getting to know you as well, because you're very engaging and we've talked about a lot of stuff and we have very similar mindsets. So one of my questions as we end was going to be, I would love to do more collaborations like this. I would hope that you're more open to it and that you now finally got a better idea of, the person who commented is the same exact person here on video chat with you today. And he's been able to grow something successfully. It's been a lot of work.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Benjamin. We've been communicating for quite a long time, actually for the last couple of years at least, and definitely, yeah. I mean, what I write on LinkedIn is me as a person. I don't put on a mask or am a
Neither do I.
person than I say. No, it is me. And if it's not me, then I just don't write. I don't interact with anything that I don't feel fits.
I don't try. I'm not
personality.
being too salesy when I do this either, because I've noticed a lot of people are salesy. And now, number one, I hope you all learned something from our guest today, Brian. I enjoyed having you, stop by the show this week. I hope you guys all have a good week, and thank you for coming by.
Thank you.
All right. So we're good now. Okay.
Okay. Super.
All right.
Super.
You can log off.
Okay. Thanks a lot,
All
Benjamin.
right. No
All right,
problem,
bye-bye.
Brian. We'll be in contact. All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. You there?
No problem. No problem. Yeah. Okay. I didn't see Chauncey that much. She said,
Justin.
Joe.
All right. We're good now. Okay. End the
Okay,
record.
all right.
We got 5
All right.
minutes. Do you want to do a quick cringe or do you want to just call it a day?
Let's call it a day.
Okay. All right. So do the conversion and then get it back to me. Oh, by the way,
Sounds
I
good.
enjoyed that conversation a lot.
Awesome.